How would you like people to remember the tenure of Judge Charles C. Lovell? What would be the things that you would want to have first come to mind when people describe you on the bench?
Well, that question reminds me of when Dolly Parton was asked, what did she want people to say about her 100 years from now? And her answer was, my, doesn't she look well? I think I would like to have somebody say, it's nice that he can be doing this today. My name is Charles C. Lovell. The C represents my mother's maiden name, Clemens. I was born in Anaconda, Montana, September 10, 1929. I'm a very simple individual.
I think intellectually and emotionally, I think he's a very complex person. What I would say is he has very simple needs in life. If he describes himself as a simple man, I'm not going to openly contradict him. My dad's needs are very simple. His life is centered around his work and his family, and that's his gospel.
Well, my father and my mother were two of the finest people that I have ever known in my life. Both had a tremendous work ethic. They were just wonderful, law-abiding, good Christian people. By the time I was about 4 or 4.5 years old, we moved to Deer Lodge. It was a small town life, typical, nice little community, good people. The Big Depression was on. Everybody felt the financial impact of it. Jobs were not as available. By the time I was in the 4th and 5th grades, I think that we had quite an awareness of the world situation, as well as what was going on at home. Yes, you mentioned a letter. I wrote a letter to the War Department suggesting some modification with respect to our fighter aircraft. Dear Sir, your comments have been noted in the department, and the correspondence has been made a matter of record for such consideration as circumstances may warrant. Your interest in national defense is appreciated. Very truly yours, the Adjutant General. The envelope was from the War Department. And when my dad saw that, he thought he may have been drafted, which was a horrendous thought for him. At the time, trying to raise 2 kids and take care of a wife and our family. So we had a good laugh over that later, but it wasn't very funny for a while. He didn't think that I should have been writing to the War Office. My dad believed that everybody should take care of himself or herself. He took it upon himself as a rather serious duty to make sure that I learned how to work at a young age. My parents owned a soda fountain in Deer Lodge, in addition to my dad's daytime job, and I did a lot of work at the soda fountain. I had 2 paper routes. In the summertime, worked in the hayfield, and in the fall pick potatoes in the field. There were plenty of jobs, particularly after Pearl Harbor, when our little country put together an army which amounted to ultimately to 10 million soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen. So jobs were plentiful for those of us who remained. I worked at the theater there, the historic Rialto Theater. I started out as an usher in the balcony. They taught me how to operate the projectors. I also, at the theater, changed the sign letters on the marquee. I actually began high school at the Powell County High School, and after just a few weeks, we moved to Missoula. I, as a freshman in high school, got a job right away at the Florence Hotel as a busboy. They were delighted to have me. I think if I hadn't been working, I might have been able to get on the Grizzly football team. There weren't very many people available out there at the time. So the war was a big factor. But the way that we responded to the war effort and the patriotism was so intense. It's a different world. It's a different country these days. So, well, anyway, I got out of high school, made it through. I had a number of jobs. I worked in a greenhouse at a grocery store. I also worked in a lumber yard, loading and unloading bricks and lumber and cement and plaster, trucking lumber, delivering building materials. I worked in a window shop. I was a pretty good puttier, if you can believe that. I had worked for the Forest Service, and this, Tyler, you'll recognize that, Monty Dolak. He had worked for the Forest Service doing the very same things that I had done when I was a kid.
This is the summer between his junior and senior year of high school, and it's right after the war. So there's not a lot of young men to fill these jobs, and there is a need. There's all these forest fires in northern Idaho, and the Forest Service put out the call, we're looking for young men. And he signed up for the Forest Service, and he left his family and his hometown, and he moved to Idaho, and he walked the fire line. And he took this very seriously. My dad could throw the Pulaski and knock fire out of a tree. You cut the burning branch, it falls to the ground, you take the shovel, you bury it with the dirt, and you put the fire out. My dad could have easily made a career in the Forest Service, and he would have been very happy being a forest ranger. But he also felt the need to serve, and I know that's what he felt when he went in the Air Force. He wanted to do his part in the war effort.
Well, I spent a year north of the Arctic Circle when I was in the Air Force. That certificate is awarded to anybody who spends at least 3 months in that country. The other framed instrument there is a letter of appreciation. It was an eventful day. We had very poor weather. We had very low ceiling. We had an aircraft in trouble. It was a C-54. Couldn't get down, unable to land, and finally we got him down under about an 80-foot ceiling onto the runway. which was no part of my job to do, but which we nonetheless did. And after I got him down, my CO said, "Don't you ever try to do that again. It can't be done." So, and I came home and began to work again and put aside enough funds to get started in law school. I went to Great Falls and practiced law with a law firm there, the firm of Church, Harris, Johnson, and Williams.
I think he was recognized generally in the state as just, an excellent lawyer at every level. And, as a result, you can imagine the value that was attached to his opinion and his participation in the firm.
I enjoyed every facet of the practice of law. I had good clients. Most of them became friends. There were some people practicing law with whom you simply could not get along. But by and large, the Montana Bar is composed of good lawyers and reasonable minds.
The scope of the different types of cases that he was involved with, to me, was amazing. It described a career that had, from the least fortunate, most challenged people to the most influential. He represented before the Montana Supreme Court not only the court, but he also represented the governor's office and the state, Congress, the legislature, before the Montana Supreme Court in different cases where he prevailed.
I worked very hard at it, but it was a delightful 26 years in my practice there.
He had a moniker that I didn't give him, but he was the Submarine Captain. And this is how I would describe it, is he was perfectly happy to let everyone go about their business as long as they were always making the right step, making the best decision. He'd stay out of your way, let you progress, discovery, do whatever you needed to do, and wouldn't say a word unless and until he felt that you were stepping off the appropriate path. Then the submarine would rise, the torpedoes would be fired, and he'd go back down and wait for you the next time. When I first arrived at Church Harris, I was a young lawyer, and so we didn't necessarily spend much time together early on. But over time, we did, and I think one of the things that gave me an in with him and that made me more interesting to him, if you will, was the fact that I'd worked for Bill Jameson for a year. And I came to know from just the interaction, Judge Lovell had great respect for Bill Jameson, not only his mental acumen and his judicial prowess, but also as a man.
This is a book on the life of Bill Jameson, who I thought was probably the finest judge I had ever known. He just was an absolute wonderful human being, a great student of the law, a hard worker, even-tempered. Every trait about him was commendable. It was endorsed by Judge Jameson to my colleague and good friend, Chuck Lovell. Warm regards, best wishes for a rewarding and successful judicial career. Signed by the judge. I've tried to be as much like my idea of what he was as a judge as I can do, but of course I don't have the qualities that he had in some respects.
I grew up immersed in a lot of politics and civic events, and it seemed like every place we went when I was a teenager, somebody asked my dad to run for judge. My dad is very reserved, and he has a dry wit and a dry humor, and I don't think he saw himself as a candidate running for judge, but he knew the justices on the state Supreme Court. He worked with them. He thought the world of them. And I think that's what started this.
There was a need for a new federal judge in Montana in the mid-'80s. The caseload was growing, and in 1984, Congress authorized an additional judgeship for the District of Montana. And Judge Lovell was right at the top of the list of potential candidates for President Reagan to nominate.
I had a telephone call from a news reporter saying that Montana was going to get a new federal judge. Would I have any interest?
I think when he decided to pursue the appointment, one of the things that we did is he had to collect all of the significant cases that he'd participated in as part of a chronology. And one of the things that I helped him do was collect those where he'd appeared in front of the Montana Supreme Court. And if memory serves, and I couldn't swear on a stack of Bibles to this, but if memory serves, it was something like 15 to 20 or so cases where he had appeared in front of the Montana Supreme Court. And he never said this, but once again, subject to check, he prevailed in every single one.
I think I was with Congressman Marlene and Senator Melcher that evening when Senator Baucus called us and said that the full Senate had unanimously approved President Reagan's nomination. So then President Reagan called me. I was very happy, of course, to hear from him, and it was a wonderful thing to talk to him. He told me that he had my commission before him, and he was teasing me a little bit. He said, "What do you want me to do with it?" And I said, "Well, I want you to sign it, Mr. President. Of course, that's what I want." He said, "All right." He was a wonderful person in many respects, and one of our greatest presidents, in my humble opinion. Just not all that humble sometimes.
It was a sad day for me when he left. I was joyful that he was able to achieve his desire, because there's nobody more deserving. But to lose someone of that caliber inside the firm was a big deal.
So help me God.
Charles C. Lovell, a 55-year-old Montana native, is sworn in as the state's third federal judge. A Great Falls attorney for the past 25 years, he will be headquartered in Helena, but will travel to Butte and Missoula to handle cases in western Montana.
I was just speaking to Judge Browning, and I think we have set some sort of a record at the number of people present for an occasion such as this.
This is an unusual court session. Everybody's happy. Nobody's against anybody. You can applaud and enjoy yourself, and you really ought to do it. You know, my reaction on coming into this room and seeing this crowd was that perhaps our new judge had made a mistake. He should have stood for elective office.
It's a real honor for me to have you here today, Judge Jameson. I appreciate very much you being here. This really has been a dream, and it is something that I have long wanted to do. I'm looking forward to this. I hope to be a good judge. I intend to be a good judge.
The photo that was taken that day is quite a piece of history in our district. It's the oldest photo of a gathering of federal judges that we have in Montana. And of all the judges pictured, only Judge Lovell is still on the bench.
I came to Helena. I began looking for staff.
I think the thing I remember most is the backlog of cases that faced him as he came aboard. And when I first started, that list was staggering. It was so long, and then that was our single focus. I mean, you have to remember that when I started, we didn't have computers. The judge's secretary had the only computer, which was basically a word processor, and so all of our research was in the books, and all of our drafts were on yellow pads. And I think about it now, and I don't know how we got anything done, because I hand wrote every draft that I gave to him.
There were things that did come natural to me, certain practices that I had always followed, that I followed as a judge.
One of the things that I remember most are the swearing-in ceremonies for all the new lawyers.
According to the law.
According to the law.
And he really would impress upon them their duties as an officer of the court, not just as an advocate or representative of your client, but you are an officer of the court, and it's your job to keep the court from error.
You know, that admonition has a lot of heft to it, and it resolves a lot of things. It resolves that tension between my need to zealously advocate for my client and the court's need to do justice. And I want to live in that tension. I do. That's what I want to do.
I would say that lawyers cast their die early on with Judge Lovell. If a lawyer came to court once unprepared, it took a long time for that lawyer to earn back the respect and trust of the judge.
He was always willing to let me do my job, but at the same time, he wasn't afraid to tell me that I was off on a tangent in his view, or I wasn't going to get anywhere with that argument, or, you know, that sort of thing.
It always troubled me to have a judge who used a gavel all the time with a gavel, and I made up my mind I was not going to touch that gavel for at least 6 months. And it's been 30 years now, and I still haven't touched the gavel. And if you can't maintain control, of course you need to do whatever it takes to do so, but Judge Jameson could always put me in my seat by just raising an eyebrow.
I have a pretty good memory that I was arguing with him, and the court told me to sit down. Judge Lovell said, "Mr. Donahoe, sit down," and I was sort of slow going down. I wasn't going down right away. And so before I started going down, Judge Lovell said, "Marshal, come forward and seat Mr. Donahoe." And so I sat down pretty quickly because the marshals were kind of big guys.
Sentencing is one of the most significant, important things that we do as judges. It was my very first sentencing, and had a young lady who had been kiting checks. I imposed a sentence of 6 months in the pre-release center for females in Billings. As I came down from the bench at the conclusion of the proceeding, my probation officer ran over and took me by the arm. He thought I was going to collapse. and I must admit I was feeling a little bit shaky. I gave myself quite a talking to over this, and next time I had a sentencing, it went a little more smoothly for me.
He took very seriously his oath and his obligation of impartiality, and didn't attend functions with lawyers. And I think some of the colleagues he had formerly practiced with were taken aback a little bit, because in Montana, I think historically, there's been a lot of informality between judges and the bar. And Judge Lovell realized the appearance of impropriety that could be conveyed by being seen out to lunch with a lawyer who has cases pending in front of you.
It comes with the territory. And in order to honor the position and to maintain the sense of independence and fairness that is an integral part of being a good judge, that's just part of the price you pay. And I think he understood that from the beginning. It's also consistent with he keeps his own counsel to a large degree.
Eventually you will lose your friends because you are not conducting regular affairs with them. At least it has been that way for me.
Judge, have filed a case in your division, so fishing is off for now. I am sorry to advise you of that. All the best, Will.
Well, we first got the diagnosis of my mother's cancer when I was still in high school. And she went into a prolonged and blessed remission for about 8 years. And my dad came on the bench in that time. And so we knew that she was in poor health, and we knew that we were going to lose her. But she died suddenly one day, September 2nd, 1994. We lost my mom. And it was a devastating blow to my dad. I almost wondered if he was going to be able to get over it. After my mom passed, my brother Chris called him up and said, "I want to take you fishing in Bermuda." I thought my dad would love that trip, but I never thought he would go. And he went, and he caught a huge marlin. It was kind of like this Captain Ahab story, on this tiny little island. They reel this fish in. I mean, it's this epic catch. The fish is like 16 feet long, and they're not able to get it on the boat. It's too big to put on the boat, so they lash it to the side of the boat, and they call ahead to the marina and say, "We're coming in." So the docks are full when they get there of spectators watching this, this big fish come in. And the local photographer is there, and they take the picture of the hoisting of the fish, and life goes on. That was a great moment for my dad and my brother.
Federal agents have taken into custody a man they suspect as the Unabomber. This drama is unfolding outside the tiny town of Lincoln, Montana, and Tom Foreman is there.
I had worked in the court probably for 10 or 11 years, and the Unabomber was arrested.
I insisted that he be represented by counsel from the public defenders, just as though he were anybody else in the world.
Uncharacteristically, Judge Lovell summoned me into chambers by myself. And he said, "So how are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing okay, Judge." And this, you got to realize, this is not usual. This wouldn't be normal. Judge Lovell always kept his judicial distance, and I always respected that and appreciated it, really. He said, "You realize I'm going to appoint you to this case today?" And I said, "I figured that was going to happen." And he said, "Well, I just want you to be aware. I want you to be cautious. It's a big deal. You're going to have a lot of people watching you. and he expressed his confidence in me.
I had dozens, literally dozens and dozens of lawyers trying to get me on the telephone, sending me letters. It even went to the extent where Michael filed a motion with the court to restrain all these other lawyers from interfering with his representation of Mr. Kaczynski.
I'm kind of sentimental about it because he was actually caring about my personal welfare. And knowing that I probably lacked experience for a case of this magnitude, but nevertheless, something told him it was okay for him to appoint me, and was just giving me that kind of fatherly caution that I want you to be on your guard. And, I just really appreciated it. Yeah, it was terrific.
I think back to the bison hunt case. This was an ongoing, many-year development. And at one point, there was a lawyer in his courtroom saying, Your Honor, we have too many bison. They wandered out, and these bison need to be killed. And my father interrupted them and said, that's the strangest need I've ever heard of anybody possessing. But he would say, those are my bison, and nobody will shoot a bison without my permission. And he felt like the guardian of the people's bison. And that was an ongoing case, and he never lost his interest or his passion for that case.
Another really significant case that Judge Lovell had was Prince versus the United States, which was a 10th Amendment case dealing with gun control legislation, the Brady Bill.
I did enter a ruling that the federal government had overstepped its rights and prerogatives here, and that in view of the violations, the Brady Bill had to be declared unconstitutional. First, my case went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that court reversed my decision. One of the three judges, Ferdinand Fernandez, a great judge, agreed with me and dissented. In my order, I had determined that the federal government had commandeered Sheriff Prince. In his dissent, Judge Fernandez, he has a better thesaurus than I do. He found that the federal government had dragooned. So anyway, the Supreme Court reversed the Ninth Circuit. I think it was an opinion by Judge Scalia. He liked the word dragooned better than commandeered. I think it's probably, in the long run, maybe the most significant cases that I was called on to decide. But I can tell you that it is a pure pleasure to have the court that you have been reversed by to suffer the same fate. I probably shouldn't have said that.
He would never be critical of the legislative branch, or at least maybe I should say never, but ordinarily he wouldn't. That wasn't his side of the street. And that's perfectly consistent with his judicial temperament, and I understand it and appreciate it. It's one of the things I love about him.
It is not the job of a United States District Judge to apply and enforce only those laws that he agrees with. We enforce and apply the law as it is given to us, and as it is required to comply with constitutional standards, we may go home and lose a night's sleep, or we may have a need to take a few Tums or something of that nature, but it's all part of the process.
One thing that I really came to appreciate about the judge and learn from him is his undying belief that the University of Montana Law School produced the finest lawyers in the country. And he hired most of his law clerks from Montana, or they had some connection to Montana, but many of his law clerks are Montana law graduates.
These are photos of my law clerks that I have had over the years, and each of these framings here is a 5-year law clerk reunion. Right down to here is the latest one.
The judge at the center of many of Montana's most high-profile cases is stepping down. After 15 years, a federal district court judge in Helena, the Honorable Charles C. Lovell, retired as of midnight last night.
If the name Judge Charles Lovell doesn't immediately sound familiar, his work has been central to the history of Montana over the past decade and a half. Lovell has presided over several of the Freeman trials, the Montana State Prison riot trials, issued an interpretation of the law known as the Brady Bill, and ruled on the issue of a management plan for the Yellowstone bison. Accused Unabomber Ted Kaczynski made his first court appearance before Lovell after being arrested in 1996.
I have been fortunate enough to have some substantial cases that I have enjoyed greatly, and of course any case of constitutional dimension is extremely interesting.
After a few months off, Lovell will continue as a senior judge, which means his workload will be about half what it has been. He may also be asked to hear cases in other states and at the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals.
And I have always thought and believed and asserted that the practice of law is one of the most honored professions that any of us can be blessed with spending our lives working in, and it has rubbed off on at least some of the family.
He did want all of us to be lawyers. 3 of the 4 of us kids are lawyers. And then he got to go to work on the next generation, and he's impressing his love of the law on his grandkids. He's been entirely successful with my oldest daughter. She's practicing law now with the Justice Department here in Montana.
You know, he's a man with a very big heart. Like all families, they've had challenges and struggles and sorrow and have stuck through it, and I think people don't get to see that side of Judge Lovell, but he is the pillar of his family as much as he is the pillar of our federal court in Montana. He's a great man.
Well, Judge Lovell turned out in the end to be a professional father to me. He taught me in many ways how to practice law correctly. You know, I needed more guidance maybe in the beginning than I do now. Not to say that I don't get out of line even now.
You know, it started out, he was my boss, and then he was my teacher, he was my mentor, and now my friend. I think at our core we're very much the same.
I could be in trial with him for 2 or 3 days, and every day he would go home and make lunch for his wife. And, you know, that was, like, interesting to me. You know, that he was the judge. I mean, he's in charge of all this stuff, all this important stuff. And still, he had a life. He had a personal life, and he had obligations and responsibilities. And he was going to fulfill those.
And just a few years after my mom died, he married Catherine Ruby, who was one of my mother's very best friends. And I hate to use the word cute, but they are very cute together. And so now they've been married. We're going on 20 years that they've been married, and I call it the second act. My brother Lance calls Catherine our bonus mom. And so we're in the bonus round here. And life is for the living. And my dad, he loves being on the bench, and he loves being married.
There's no more honorable job, in my opinion, than doing what Chuck Lovell has been doing and continues to do. I hate to think of the day when he's not walking through the neighborhood and going down to work, because it will be the end of a literally wonderful era and a wonderful lifetime of service, both in the judicial work and as a lawyer for the state of Montana.
It's interesting to think about when a mature, accomplished judge comes to a conclusion, have we lost anything? Well, the easy answer would be, sure, we're losing a good judge. That's the obvious answer. But I would submit that in this case, in Judge Lovell's situation, the manner in which he approached his judicial function and accomplished, I think, the goals that he set for himself, I think the deeper answer is no, I don't think we've lost anything, because he's given everything.
All rise. The United States District Court in and for the District of Montana is now in session. The Honorable Charles C. Lovell presiding.
I'm tremendously grateful to have the opportunity. It hasn't all been pure pleasure, but it was an opportunity for me to participate in our country in a very meaningful fashion. You're very fortunate because you're becoming citizens and members of the finest country in the history of the world. It seems like only yesterday that I took the oath, and time goes by so quickly.
That I will administer justice
without respect to persons.
Without respect to persons.
Being here and doing what I have done is as much as or more than whatever I expected of myself.
This really has been a dream, and it is something that I have long wanted to do. I'm looking forward to this. I hope to be a good judge. I intend to be a good judge.
And I've done the very best that I could with what I had. And I intend to keep doing so, rightly or wrongly. Let us welcome our new citizens. Now that is not the end of the ceremony. We're not letting you get away that easily.